Hello everyone, it's Mafalda and welcome back to a new video. And as you can see by the title, it is going to be 23 books that I want to read in 2023. And I've seen people do this every single year. I always thought of participating, but I was just always very hesitant because, we're already in the 2020s, so it's going to be 20 plus books every year that I say that I'm going to read. So I always do like a shorter TBR and not really this idea of like doing the same number as the year we're at. But this year I'm just feeling spicy and crazy, so I'm just going to do that. Because 23 books is a lot. It is basically a fourth of the books that I read in a year. So saying that I'm going to read all of these books, maybe it's not going to happen, but I just want to like put it out there, and maybe if I have this structured list in my mind, I'm just more easily going to read those books. And yeah, just let's go. Basically, I decided that I wanted obviously to prioritize my physical TBR, but there are also some books that are not in my physical TBR that I would like to get this year and read this year, obviously. So I decided to structure these 23 books into 3 categories. So the first category is books on my physical TBR, and I decided to pick 10 books on my physical TBR that I would like to read this year. So yeah, we'll see if I get to all of them, but hopefully I do. And then I decided to pick books that I don't own yet, but I want to get this year. I want to buy them and I would like to possibly read them. And I decided to pick 8 books that I would like to buy and read this year. And for the 5 remaining books, I decided to pick books that still aren't out yet. So they're going to come out this year and I would like to get my hands on it, either a physical copy or an audiobook or something, and read them this year. I think the books I picked aren't out yet. I made this list, I think, like a month and a half ago. I was supposed to film this video a lot earlier than I already am because I'm filming this in March. But yeah, I made this a long time ago. I think the books aren't out yet, but we'll see. I'll check. Let's just get started because this is going to be a very, very long video. So yeah. So starting with books that I physically own, 10 books I picked, which was very hard because I have about like 40 books that I own and still haven't read on my TBR. But I tried to pick books that I just can't believe I haven't picked up yet, and this is definitely one of them, and it is Let Me Hear a Rhyme by Tiffany D. Jackson. I just can't believe this is still on my TBR. I think I have read all of Tiffany D. Jackson's books except for this one. I know she has a middle grade book out that I think she published last year. That one I'm not really interested in reading because I don't read a lot of middle grade, but this one, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why I still haven't read it because I even read Allegedly, I think later last year. So yeah, this is the only Tiffany D. Jackson book that I have left to read. And this book is set in Brooklyn in 1998, which was the year I was born, so even more of a reason to read this book. And in this book, Steph, who is a musician, is murdered, and then his best friends and his little sister are trying to not only bring his murder to justice, but also promoting his music because he was a musician and I think he never really published anything. And so they're trying to do these 2 things, and they probably use his music to bring his case to justice. And yeah, it just sounds honestly great, amazing. I love books set in the 90s and I don't read a lot of them. Has to be now. So yeah, I can't believe I still haven't read this book, and this is definitely a priority for 2023. Next book that I have here on my list is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. I actually got this book last year, but I've been meaning to read this book for years and years and years. And I haven't read Murakami maybe in 2-3 years, but I kind of miss it. I do have some issues with his book, especially the last few books that I read were just kind of problematic for me, but I still want to give more of his work a try. Kafka on the Shore is probably one of my favorite books that I've ever read. I do need to reread it because maybe there are some problematic things in the book, in that book as well. I just wasn't aware at the time. But yeah, I still want to read Norwegian Wood. I've heard a lot of great things about this book. I do want to maybe give Murakami another chance. He needs redemption in my eyes. So yeah, maybe this will be the book. And this book, from reading the back, I think it follows Toru and Naoko, and they're young students, and they have like a mutual obsession with each other, but then their best friend dies, and I kind of don't want to know more. But yeah, I'm intrigued. The next book that I have on this list is Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. I also got this book last year, and I think the cover just drew me to it. I love this cover, it's just so beautiful. And honestly, I don't even know what this book talks about, and the back is kind of like vague about it. I think it talks about a mother and a daughter, and it actually describes them as the woman in her angry shadow, who is probably the mother. And it is kind of about their bind and just like mother-daughter relationship. I don't know more, and I am intrigued already because I love family stories, family-centered stories. So yeah, I'm really interested in reading this book. I kind of wish the back gave me a little bit more to work with, but I'm still intrigued. Next book, it is a classic. I wanted to include at least one classic in this list, and the one that I'm picking is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This is a bit of a chunky one, and I do have a problem with classics that I think I found out last year. It's very hard for me to get into one, and I usually like pick up physically and then just pick up the audiobook because it's a lot easier to digest the story, I feel like, and it is a lot easier to kind of know the inflection that the characters are speaking in. So I usually just pick up the audiobook, but I am going to try my darnest, hardest, everything to read this physically. And I think this is about a man who is forced to shelter at a house in Yorkshire, and there he starts to discover kind of the people that lived there once before, Catherine Earnshaw and the foundling Heathcliff, and about their love and betrayal. And it says it is a transgressive novel about obsession, violence, and death. Great. I didn't know this book was so dark. At least from the back of the book, it sounds really dark, but yeah, I'll give this one a try. Next book that I have on this list is Wild Beauty by Anne-Marie McLemore. I've been saying for maybe 3 years that I want to give Anne-Marie McLemore a try, and I just never do. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I didn't have a book by them physically still yet, but now I do. I've owned this book for like a year, or maybe a year and a half, I don't even know, and I still haven't picked it up, so now there's really no excuse. But yeah, 2023 is the year I read Anne-Marie McLemore. I'm just putting that out into existence and it will come true. And this book follows the Nomielzwid women who live in La Pradera in kind of a garden forest situation, and they have a tragic legacy where if they fall in love too deeply, their lovers vanish, I think. Yeah, vanish. And after many generations of this happening, a boy suddenly appears in the gardens, and they're kind of like, what do we do with this boy? And it's kind of, I think, one of them maybe falling in love with him. I'm not really sure, but it just sounds beautiful. And I am kind of this year starting to stray away from fantasy because I feel like it's not a genre for me, but this book just sounds so beautiful and so kind of enchanting and charismatic that I'm still interested in it, so I'm gonna run with that. Next book that I have here is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe, and I bought this book last year. There was a time where everyone was talking and raving about this book, and I think this is kind of like a TikTok book. I don't have TikTok, so I don't know. And this book follows 17-year-old Lily, and one day I think she goes to the Telegraph Club, which is a lesbian bar, and she meets Kathleen Miller. And this is set in the 1950s, and so obviously two girls falling in love is not well seen. And I think the book is just following their love and how they deal with the fact that their love is not well seen, and also the fact that Lily is Chinese American and her parents are maybe getting deported. I haven't read a historical YA book in quite a while, not even a historical adult book. Honestly, I just haven't been reading a lot of historical books. So really interested in this one. I feel like it's going to be right up my alley. The next book that I have on my list is The Transition Baby by Tori Peters. This was also one that was heavily talked about maybe like a year ago, and yeah, still haven't read it, but I'm really interested in it. And this book follows our main character Reese, who is a trans woman, and she seemingly has the perfect life. She has a loving relationship with her girlfriend Amy, and she has a New York apartment, which is very nice, and she has a job that she doesn't hate, and so she's doing really good. But then fast forward 3 years, and she has broke up with Amy, her girlfriend, and she feels very lonely, and she feels like the only thing that can fix her is to have a child, maybe. And then one day Amy calls her and asks her if Reese wants to be a mother, and she's really intrigued by that. And then one day Amy, who is also trans, she's attacked on the street, and she decides to detransition and becomes Ames. And Ames starts to have an affair with his boss, who is called Katrina. There's a lot of characters. And then Katrina falls pregnant because Ames thought that because of the amount of hormones from her transition, or his transition, that he would be infertile, but apparently he's not, and Katrina's pregnant. And now Ames and Reese and Katrina are in this situation where they're like, could we form an unlikely parent trio, I guess. And yeah, it just sounds really interesting. The idea of this transitioning is something that I've heard in the past couple of years online, and I really want to read from that perspective. So yeah, really interested in this book. The next book that I want to read is actually a nonfiction, and it is by Julia Shaw, and it is The Hidden Culture, History and Science of Bisexuality. I love reading books about being bisexual. I think that's just my cup of tea. And yeah, this is a nonfiction book about being bi, and I love this cover, and I'm really intrigued to know how this book is organized and what it really talks about. I don't know if it's more of a memoir, if it's more scientifical, but I think it is more scientifical, so really interested in reading this one in 2023. Now the next book is actually one that I'm probably reading in March. It just feels right with International Women's Day and all of that, and it is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is a book that I've had on my TBR for years, and it is finally time to read this book. I didn't really like Song of Achilles, so I'm kind of hesitant going into it, but I've heard that this book is better, at least to some people and people that I trust. I feel like those people really like this one more than the Song of Achilles. And I don't think I need to explain what this book is about. It is obviously about the goddess Circe. I don't know how to say it, but I'm just gonna say Circe. And yeah, I think she's a witch, and yeah, that's all I really know about it. But yeah, I'm really interested in reading it this month, hopefully. And then a last book that I have from my physical TBR, it is All My Rage by Sabathir, another book that I got last year that I was really hoping to read last year, but I just didn't get to it, so reading it this year. And this book follows a young couple who was once in Pakistan, and then one day just tragedy strikes in their country and they are forced to kind of leave and start a new life in the United States. And then it also follows two sisters, I think, in the United States, in California. And I think they one day grow apart for some reason. And yeah, that's all I really know. And it is about a motel and trying to save the motel. And yeah, I'm just interested in reading it because I love Sabathir's writing from what I've read. And yeah, I've heard good things about this book, so I am really interested in it. So now moving on to the books that I don't own yet, but I want to buy and possibly read this year. And actually I'm going to start with two books that I already bought since making this list. So we're on the right track. I bought these two books on my trip to Copenhagen. If you haven't seen that video, I'm gonna put in the cards right here. But yeah, I bought these two books there, and it's actually great because these books were already on my list of books that I don't own and want to buy. So yeah, the first one that I have is 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. And this book follows Eva and Shane, and when they were teenagers, they had a whole week of romance and just kind of a really deep connection when they were teenagers. And then it's them reconnecting 15 years later at a literary event, and it is about that week that they spend together after they reconnect. And yeah, it just sounds like a beautiful love story. I've heard amazing things about this book, and I'm just excited to finally read it. And then the next book on this list that I already got, thankfully, is My Pen is the Wing of a Bird, new fiction by Afghan women, and this is a collection of short stories by Afghan women. I think it's in the subtitle. And I've heard also great things about this book. It just sounds really fascinating, and I love reading kind of like anthologies and collections of short stories because it's always a great way to find new authors and new books to check out. So I'm really excited to read this one. And now moving on to the books that I don't own yet, but I want to get this year. So the first one is Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkinson, and I've been on a journey to find this book because I keep finding the ugly UK cover, and I desperately want, I think, the US one. I am not sure if it's the US one, but I will insert a picture here of the one that I want and the one that I don't want. And it's just really hard to find that prettier cover anywhere, even online. So I'm on a journey, but I will find that book eventually. And I think this is a book about two siblings named Byron and Benny who are trying to figure out more about their mother's life, who is called Eleanor. And it's just them trying to find more about her story and kind of like undigging secrets about her that they didn't know, and also trying to reconnect because they kind of lost touch and grew apart. I keep saying this, but I love books about complicated family relationships. Those are just my thing. So I feel like I'm really going to like this book, and this is tagged as historical fiction on Goodreads, so it probably follows the siblings in the present day, but it also goes back and looks at Eleanor's story. I love those types of books, so I just feel like I'm going to adore this book. That's why I'm desperately trying to find the cover that I like so I can finally read it. That is one book that I really want to own. Then another book that I want to read this year is Elatsue by Darcy Little Badger. This is a fantasy, which I don't have a lot on this list because, as I said, I'm trying to kind of stay away from it, but this one just really intrigues me, and the reviews were just amazing last year when it came out, or 2 years ago. And this book follows our main character Elatsue, who is a part of the Lipan Apache people, and I think she can see ghosts and raise ghosts, especially of animals, and that is a skill that has been passed down through the generations from her people, the Lipan Apache people. And then one day her cousin, I think, dies and no one really pays attention. And with her skills, she tries to find out what really happened to her cousin. This sounds like a really beautiful story. I think it's queer. I'm not sure in what way. Maybe Elatsue is queer, I don't know. But I am really interested in knowing, and I'm really interested in reading this book this year. Also, I'm looking down because I'm looking at my computer because it has the books right here. So yeah, I'm sorry for that. Then another book that I want to read this year is In the Country We Love, My Family Divided by Diane Guerrero. And this has been on my TBR for years and years, and I still can't believe I haven't read it. And this is a memoir about Diane Guerrero's life. And she was born in the US, but her family is originally from Colombia. And when she was 14, just out of the blue, her parents one day, and her brother, I think, were deported back to Colombia, and she was just left here. And it's basically about her striving on her own in the US as a 14-year-old, and about her trying to reconnect with her family and trying to understand all of these struggles about being undocumented in the US. And it just sounds so powerful and so amazing. And yeah, I obviously know her from Orange is the New Black, like everyone. And I just didn't know that she had this difficult of a life. And so I'm really interested in knowing more about her. And yeah, just really interested in reading this book. I can't believe I still haven't. So 2023 is the year. Then another nonfiction that I would like to read this year is Before We Were Trans, A New History of Gender by Kit Hayam. And this is obviously a nonfiction about being trans and the history of trans people. And I've read a couple of books that kind of like touch on that, about the history and how long trans people have been here. But yeah, I feel like this book will really touch on the history, and I really feel like it's going to talk about it globally and not just in the US, which is something that I've been kind of struggling with nonfiction books lately, which is like they're always US centric, which kind of annoys me sometimes, especially depending on the topic. And yeah, I would really like for this one to be kind of like global, and from the plot it kind of feels like it will talk about the global history. But yeah, we'll see. I'm really intrigued, and I hope it is everything that I want. Then the next book that I would like to read this year is Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. And this is an interesting one, which I've been debating on if I want to read or not, because it just sounds kind of weird. But yeah, interested, I think. And this book follows Rachel, who is 24, and she has made calorie counting her religion. She has very obsessive food rituals, she works out a lot, so basically she has an eating disorder, and this was especially done by her mother, who has really taught her that all throughout her life. And so one day her therapist recommends that Rachel goes on a detox from her phone, and so that she can stay away from her mother, who doesn't really help her with her eating disorder and actually just makes it worse. And so on that detox, Rachel meets Miriam, who is a young Orthodox Jewish woman, and she works at a frozen yogurt shop that Rachel really likes. And Miriam is really interested in kind of like feeding Rachel, kind of like as a mother. And yeah, they form a really big bond, and it is just about, I think, that bond that they form and the fact that Miriam wants to feed her as a mother would, I guess. And yeah, it just sounds kind of weird. I know that this author also wrote The Pisces, which I still haven't read, but I also heard it's very weird, and I'm kind of interested in reading that one as well. But yeah, I've heard some good things about this book, also some bad things, but I'm just gonna focus on the good, and I really hope I like this book as well. And then the next book that I would like to get this year and read this year is Dominicana by Angie Cruz. This book has also been on my TBR for years and years, and last year I read the new Angie Cruz book, which I really adored, and then now I can't think of the name. What is it called? It has a yellow cover. I really enjoyed reading that book, and so now it just makes sense to go back and read her more notable work, which is Dominicana. And this book follows a 15-year-old named Ana Cancion, who is in the Dominican Republic, and she has always dreamed of going to the US. And one day she gets a marriage proposal, which leads her to go to New York to live. And so she obviously accepts, and they go to New York, and it's basically about this young girl living in New York and kind of finding herself in a new country, in a new city. But I think once she's there, she's really unhappy and everything is going wrong. And I think then she wants to escape and kind of like try a new life somewhere else with someone else, I think. And yeah, it just sounds like an interesting story about immigration. I think it's also set in the 60s, which will be a very interesting perspective, so I'm really interested in reading this one. And now moving on to the 5 new releases that I would like to read this year. So first of all is obviously You Don't Have a Shot by Raquel Marie. I read Ophelia After All last year, I think. Yeah, a year ago, actually. And I absolutely adored that book. It was one of my favorites of last year, and so I'm really excited to see what Raquel Marie does next. And this book, even though it is about soccer, I'm still interested, and I just think Raquel is going to write an amazing story like she did with Ophelia's. And yeah, all I know about this book is that it is a queer story about two girls who are, I think, rivals in soccer teams, and yeah, that's all I know, that's all I want to know. Really interested in reading this one. The next book that I would like to read this year is by our queen. She's back. Elizabeth Acevedo is publishing Family Lore, I think in August, if I'm not mistaken. And the only thing I know about the story that I want to know is that it is about a family of Dominican women, and it is following all of these women, and I think some of them have like some kind of magic to them. And I think they are gathering, and so it's just following them as they go to this gathering of the family. And yeah, that's all I know, that's all I want to know. I know this book will break me, I just know it. Elizabeth Acevedo always does that, and I really miss her books. So yeah, I'm really excited for this one. Now a really intriguing one, which is Yellow Face by R.F. Kuang, which is coming out in May. And this book follows two best friends, June and Athena. June is a white girl and Athena is Asian American, and they are best friends. They went to Yale together, and now they're trying to publish their debut book also together. But it feels like June is not having the best luck because no one really cares about stories from a white perspective. We have a bunch of them already. Athena is having a little bit more luck when it comes to publishing her work. And one day Athena is involved in a really freak accident and she ends up dying, and June is there and she's a witness. And because of that shock, she decides to act on impulse, and she steals one of Athena's manuscripts, and she decides to take that script or that manuscript and she decides to publish it as her own. The story is about Chinese Americans in the World War I, and June decides to publish that story as her own. And I think, I didn't read the rest of the plot because I didn't want to know more, but it probably is a success. And it is just such an interesting take on a story, and I'm really interested in seeing what R.F. Kuang has to say about this kind of story. So yeah, really intrigued about reading that one. And then the next book that I would like to read this year is Going Bi-Coastal by Dahlia Adler. And this is a queer YA romance, and it is about a girl who basically has two options for her summer. She either stays home in New York with her dad and maybe possibly go for the girl that she has been crushing on, or she has also the decision to go to LA to be with her mom and try to fix their relationship and maybe possibly fall in love with the guy there that she didn't know and didn't see was coming. And so our main character has 24 hours to make this decision of either staying in New York or going to LA for the summer. And I think the book kind of like follows those two alternatives and kind of plays out how it would be on either scenario. And I just love books that do that. And there's not a lot of them, but I have read a couple of books about what if, and I love seeing the alternatives. So yeah, really interested. I think this is going to be such a cute like summer romance to read, and this book is coming out in June, so it is perfect for Pride Month and to read in the summer. So yeah. And finally, I am tired of talking. The last book that I have on my list of new releases coming out this year is A Shot in the Dark by Victoria Lee. And I was actually researching about books coming out this year, and this one just really drew me into it. Like the other ones that I mentioned were already from authors that I already read. This one, I haven't read anything by Victoria Lee, but the cover really drew me to it, and then I read the plot and it just sounded right up my alley, so I'm gonna give this one a try. And this book follows our main character Ellie, who just returned to Brooklyn after almost a decade after being shunned from her Orthodox community. She returned to Brooklyn once more, and she has still very painful scars from that time. but she gets an opportunity to study photography with an art legend who is called Wyatt Cole, and so she decides to take that opportunity. And before classes start, she decides to go to a queer club, and there she meets a guy, and they have a one-night thing. And then afterwards she goes to class and she realizes that the guy that she had that fling with was actually her professor, Wyatt Cole, who she's going to be studying with. And this Wyatt actually has a very troubled past, also with substance abuse, but also because he came out as transgender in the art world. And I think the rest of the book is just Ellie and Wyatt trying to figure out their connection and their relationship because they are teacher-student. I'm not really one for romance, even though I have mentioned some romance titles in this list. But this just kind of sounds like the type of romance that I usually go for, which is queer and people with just like a lot of issues trying to figure themselves out in their 20s. And yeah, it just sounds right up my alley. So I am interested in it. Also, the cover is beautiful. So yeah, that concludes my 23 books that I would like to read in 2023. To be honest, we're already in March and I still haven't read any of these books, but there's still hope. There's still a couple of months in the year, and I will obviously try my best to read all of these 23 books, but if I don't get to them, nothing will happen. I will just read them next year, hopefully. So yeah, I still wanted to do this. I think this is a fun video. It's just really nice to have a list of books that I could just like grab or find in bookstores and buy, and yeah, it's just really nice for my organized head. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you on my next one. Bye!